Anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, would you just be able to talk? So you mentioned earlier that you had done some work, game day work with the rugby club. Would you be able to talk us through how you would sort of diagnose if a player had a suspected concussion on the pitch on game day, and what steps you would take towards if you thought they did have a concussion?
Yeah. So basically, sitting on the sidelines of the field, if I suspect a player's got a concussion, there's certain sort of signs that we look for. So say someone goes into a collision and they're knocked unconscious, obviously a big flag that there's likely a concussion going on. If they sort of are limp or motionless as they're falling to the floor, so you often see that where someone's out before they hit the floor. If people fall into sort of those tonic postures, so I think in the UFC they call it getting starched, but where people sort of fall into that flexed rigid thing, so their arms might be hanging up in the air but they're unconscious. As people get up, if they're quite unsteady or start running in the wrong direction, it's a good indication that you need to go and have a chat with that person. So during the game, the idea is the physio or the trainer will run out, have a chat with the person. There's a few questions that always get asked, the Maddox questions. So it's things like, do you know where you are? Do you know what day it is? Do you know who you're playing? What's the score? What half is it? Who did you play last week and did you win the game? So those sorts of questions give you a quick idea of, I guess, memory and sort of baseline neurological stuff. From there, you can go on to do a bit of a balance assessment because, as I said, one of the big symptoms is that sort of unsteadiness. So you get people to close their eyes, see if they can balance on 2 feet, see if they can balance on 1 foot. If you suspect or if they fail any of those sorts of things, you remove them from play. Even in the in the professional leagues, you see them come off for HIA. So what happens in the professional leagues is because they've got sports doctors there, they'll come off and do what's called a SCAT-5 assessment, which is a bit more of a comprehensive cognitive and neurological assessment. They have an adapted version for kids as well, but being a physio, I have the scope to do it, but on a game day situation, if I suspect that someone needs to go onto that step, they're not going back on, not at the level that we sort of work with at Inspire. If I suspect someone's having a concussion, you treat it like they have a concussion and they need to get medical clearance from a doctor before any return to play. And that's a pretty standard protocol across most codes where they won't be allowed to go back to training unless they've been cleared by a doctor. So whether that's immediately like you're going to the hospital because there's some bigger red flags, so if someone's complaining of neck pain or if they're getting tingling or weakness in their arms or legs, or if they've got an increasing headache or an increase in their confusion or agitation or repeated vomiting, those are the signs of a more sinister head injuries, so things like actual bleeds on the brain and whatnot. They're going to hospital, but if someone's just a little bit confused, a bit dazed, they're a little bit unbalanced, then I think it's probably on the more mild end. The advice is to go and see your GP, but giving them the information around what those red flags are to look for, because as we know with concussion, initially it might not look too bad and then things can progress over the sort of coming hours. So that's where that education around, not going home and, leaving someone by themselves if you suspect they might have a concussion, because if you, live by yourself and you go home and you start to have these increasing symptoms, no one can sort of call an ambulance for you. So, game day, if I'm suspecting that someone has a concussion, they're getting pulled from the game, and then depending on the severity, they're getting told, you're going to the hospital, you need to go and see your GP, and the education to the family member, partner, parent, whatever it is keep an eye on them. These are the things to watch for. Make sure that they don't take any sort of sedating painkillers or anything like that. Make sure they don't go and drink any alcohol, and make sure they don't go to sleep within sort of 4 hours. Not so much that they're going to sleep is what's going to do the damage, but if they're asleep, you can't really assess for their levels of drowsiness because they're asleep. So, makes sense?